Everybody, this is Matt here with another chess analysis. This game was with me on the white pieces against Ronin-Samurai. I was 1540 and he was 1498 for this match. Um, I tried an somewhat interesting gambit. Fritz doesn't particularly like it. It's not really bad, but it doesn't give me quite the advantage that I was hoping for. And I'll go over that in just a moment when we get to it. And typically I play d4 as my main opening, and I've been trying e4 a little bit lately, and this is one of the games that came out of the e4 opening that I was playing with. So we start out with e4 and c5, and so I go with the mainline open Sicilian, which goes as follows. Um, just common development. Just going through the main lines, and we go into the Najdorf variation with this pawn to a6 from black. From here, I just develop the bishop to e4, trying to, once this knight moves, to have this diagonal in sight for potential attacks, and just to have a little bit more control of the queen side later in the game. From here we see the pawn come up to e6, which is a normal move. Typically this bishop comes here. Later this pawn could come up and we could see this bishop coming to this square as well. Although typically you see this pawn just come up initially if that were the plan. But sometimes you do see this sort of slow development for that sort of bishop development later in the game. From here we see the bishop come over to c4, just getting ready to sit on this diagonal. Black typically castles kingside, so this is just placing the bishop on a pretty good, strong square to be able to maybe influence some attacks later in the match, as well as setting sights later on the f7 square, although the pawn on e6 is blockading that temporarily. So from here we see bishop to e7, getting ready to castle kingside soon, and now we see the queen come up to d2. Another position would have been the queen coming to f3. It's another strong square for the queen. I just opted for the queen coming up to d2 in this match, but more typical is f3, which is probably stronger to play in the position. But that's not what I ended up playing in the match. From here we see castles and castles, and as you typically see in the Sicilian, both sides have castles on opposite ends of the board, and so the match is going to be very sharp. It's going to be very aggressive from both sides, just trying to push down the board and just defeat the other king as quickly as possible, since playing defense doesn't really work when opposite sides are castled. From here we see the knight develop to c6, putting pressure on the knight. I ignore this and I just go ahead and play f4, getting ready to push some pawns forward on the king side of the board to start an attack. And after we see the knights exchange, we see the pawn come up to b5, attacking the bishop, and the bishop just gets kicked back to b3, maintaining this diagonal that he was originally put on, indirectly putting pressure on the king if these pawns were to be moved. So just trying to maintain that pressure for later in the game, since these pawns won't be here forever. From here we see the bishop develop to b7, attacking this pawn. It is defended currently, but just kind of tying this knight down to this pawn now, since the queen can easily be kicked off the square. So she's not really much of a defender at the moment of it. And now we see my gambit, which is g4. This g4 pawn was pushed, wrong color, with a similar idea to the Semislav gambit that you see. It's really to try to open up this file for the rook to be on later in the match, and you typically don't see this. Fritz, I lost. White had a slight edge in the position. I think it was about 0.3, and this move dropped me down to negative 0.15. So it was a slight drop in my edge in the moment, but I was kind of hoping that by doing so I would be able to gain a stronger edge later by having that semi-open file aiming right at the king. From here we see black accept the gambit with knight captures on g4, and now we see the rook move to g1, and there's no time to grab this bishop trying to win the bishop pair because there's a mate threat if the knight were to move. And so to make up for that, we see the pawn come up now to e5 to try to deflect my queen from this mate threat. But much better would have been just to bring the knight back to f6 to defend the mate threat. According to Fritz, that move was significantly stronger than weakening this pawn structure, because now this bishop has direct line of sight on this f7 square, and so that's another problem that black now has to worry about. So from here we see the pawn capture and the knight recapture, and now we see the bishop come up to h6, getting ready to start an attack on the king now that I have this pawn pinned with the rook. So the position's getting very tight for black, and Fritz was beginning to give white a strong edge at this stage of the game. So we see now the bishop come to f6 to defend this pawn, and to try to get some tactical maneuvers with this knight, with getting the bishop attacking the queen once it moves. And I make a mistake here, and I play rook on d to f1. But I want to look at another continuation that was much stronger that I did not realize, and that continuation is rook captures on g7 check, followed by the bishop capturing, and now the rook coming to g1, pinning the bishop. And this is just better in virtually every way than the move bringing the rook to f1. But I didn't see this continuation. I didn't see being able to pin that bishop and having an even stronger attack as a result. So we don't see that. Instead, we just see the rook come over to f1, trying to just get the other rook involved into the attack. And now we see the knight jump back to g6 to try to block the pin on this pawn. And from here, I'm able to just trade off material and weaken the black position with the rook takes bishop, because at worst this rook can be recaptured with my bishop, and it's simply a rook and bishop for a rook and bishop. So that's the reason why we see that. The queen recaptures, and then we have the queens come off the board, and I have the option of taking the rook, which is obviously in my plans in this match at some point to take that rook. But there's a saying in chess: if you find a good move, find a better move before you make the first one. And that's simply because there are moves that are, yes, it's a good move, but there's many times there are very good in-between moves that you can still do what you're wanting to do. In this case, my bishop captured the rook on f8, but I don't have to do it immediately, because if I have a move that has an even bigger threat than that, then I can threaten to do that, and then black has to respond to that, and then I can take the rook afterward. So I kind of fudge in some free turns in between the moves. That's why it's called an in-between move. And the move is pawn to h4. The knight is pinned, and so this pawn is threatening to just capture this knight in the following turns. And so black has to deal with that before having to worry about this rook. And so we see the king scoot over to h8 in response. But now there's a windmill, which I just discussed in my previous video, that has been set up completely accidentally, to be honest. I mean, I wasn't, trying to make this tactic come into play, but it just did, by chance. So it was really, I'm not going to try to say that I was honestly setting all that up. I wasn't. That's just the way the game went. But now the pawn can still just press forward, and moving the knight is no good, because there's a pinwheel that's going to hurt the position even more for black. And in fact, it's actually going to lead to checkmate because black misplays in the way to defend it. And the big mistake was moving the knight. It was actually best to just let the knight fall. But we see the knight jump away to e5. But now I have the pinwheel tactic, which is where basically you have a rook or a piece that's guarding a lot of squares where the king wants to go. And you have another piece, such as the bishop, being able to check and then discover check. Let me do that a different color. Discover check the king. Oop. And the king's going to have to continuously just shuffle between these squares while my bishop can move over and over as many times as needed. And so that's what we see. We see the bishop come down, check. The king has to move. The bishop takes the pawn, check, forcing this knight to come back. There's no other move to make. So moving the knight was bad because the knight was actually just going to get forced back into the same square. And now we see the knight jump back, and I just go ahead and capture that knight off. And I almost missed a checkmate. That was the end of the game. And it's simply rook to h1 because there's no way to stop the rook from coming here and checkmating the king on the following turn. Took me a while. I was trying to find a good move to make from here, and after a minute, it realized that, hey, I have a checkmate threat, and there's no way to prevent the rook. There's no move that black can do that can stop this rook from reaching h8, and black resigns in this position as a result. So I made this analysis because I thought this is a somewhat interesting game. I'm not really sure if the pawn to g4, the gambit, if you want to call it that, that I was giving off, what is a good gambit. I mean, it comes out of the semi-Slav, but I kind of applied it to a Sicilian game. So I'm kind of debating whether or not maybe that's something to look into. Maybe that move is still a good playable move in the Sicilian in this position, in this particular game that I played here. It might have been a fluke. Maybe I just got lucky and, black didn't take advantage of the fact that I gave up material. But it seemed to work pretty well in this game. And when I analyzed it with Fritz, Fritz was able to find pretty decent continuations. Now, whether or not those are better than the, standard Sicilian games, maybe they're not. I'm not sure. But anyway, I like this video because, first of all, it had that pawn gambit, which is unusual to see in this opening in this type of game, as well as it had a better example of a windmill, although it was a short windmill of only one capture, but it did demonstrate that tactic a second time, which is always good to see. The more you see that tactic, the more you'll be able to find it in your own games, or maybe you'll spot it in your games if you didn't even set it up. Like here, I didn't even try to make that happen, but it kind of worked together and it kind of happened for me. So I got lucky on it. But I was able to realize, like, hey, I have a really good tactic to exploit here, since I knew what it was and I was aware of how to use a windmill. So anyway, that's all I have for this video. Thanks for watching, and subscribe.